Hey, Peter, welcome back to Call Me Data. How's it going?
Hey David, how are you?
I'm
Welcome back
good.
this week. And yeah, excited. But as always, I have to comment on the shirt. It's not an Aloha shirt, David. I am deeply troubled by this. You got a
It is
sushi
not.
shirt.
It is a sushi shirt. It's got sushi going all down the side.
I
So
love it.
trying to hopefully it doesn't make you think too much about dinner while we're talking
I'm
today.
always I always generally have two things in my mind: tequila and dinner. So I think we're good.
I got my coffee. I'm ready to go. So
Yes, you are.
it's a new day, a new era for the Call Me Data podcast, right?
It is. This is the first one that we're actually recording and not live anymore, though they will be released at the same time as the live ones are. We're now going to be global. Yeah, we're going to be published on every single major podcast provider in the universe. That's impressive.
Yeah. So let's take a minute because hopefully that our going live on these podcast platforms also means that there will be some folks who haven't listened to us on LinkedIn Live and who are now joining us on the podcast platform. So, uh, Peter, introduce yourself and then I'll do the same.
So, yeah, no, for those that are joining, hopefully for the first time, I mean, if you look back, you'll see there's quite a few other additions from the live out there. But, we want to reintroduce ourselves. Just a new kickoff with the new platform. So, Peter Memon, for those that never met or spoke to me before, my history is I've worked in finance for over 30 plus years. Worked at most of the big banks. I've always been in engineering type roles. I spent a lot of decades designing trading systems for big banks, global trading systems. I think I pivoted probably about 15 years ago to analytics and big data, and that's where I've been since. Been playing with analytics for a very long time. I love this stuff, always have. I've been passionate about it and been passionate about big data for as long as I can possibly remember, since I probably got out of college. So yeah, that's basically my story in 30 seconds. But David, off to you.
Yeah, so obviously I'm David Gleason, and together with Peter, I'm one of the co-founders of All In on Data. I have a similar background to Peter's, but not identical. So I spent almost 20 years in consulting, and then I moved to Wall Street and worked at a variety of large global banks, primarily as a chief data and analytics officer. So I had responsibility for everything from data strategy to data governance and management to building and operating data platforms
Yeah.
and running analytics teams, including the use of AI. So Peter and I came together and formed All In on Data probably a little over a year ago now, I think, really, when we first got the ball
Yeah.
rolling.
Yeah, probably. I
And
think it's been about that long. Yeah. And I think David and I are former colleagues. That's how we met, for many years ago, working at one of the large banks. And, we subsequently reconnected. And I think we were at that juncture in our careers. We decided that it's time to embark on something new and different. And we both have this unique complementary set of skills at a time. And I was explaining this to somebody earlier. If you could have designed a time to do this with our skills and where we are in our careers, you couldn't have picked a better time.
yeah,
Don't you
yeah,
agree?
I agree. Oh, totally. And what's funny about it is the journey we set out on is not the journey we're on now because, things happen along the way, right? Like we had this idea that we were just going to hang up a shingle and do some advisory work and really, work, but have a lot of fun doing it. Well, the good news is we're still having a lot of fun and we're still working, but suddenly All In on
Yes.
Data has become a real company, and I don't know that we
Yeah.
actually expected that. So we have partners, we have people working with us, we have projects and clients, and
Right.
it's taken a different turn than we thought it would, but it's still a blast and a lot of fun.
Oh, no, I mean, look, there's not a day I wake up, and I know I can speak for both of us that I don't look forward to doing what we're doing. I've always loved technology. I know you have, and you and I both are passionate about certain things, photography being another one of them. And, I never imagined that I'd be sitting here over a year later doing this. Well, maybe I did, but it's just very different than I think you and I had envisioned. But it's also, like you said, having a blast.
Yeah.
It was a natural evolution. And oddly enough, I feel like you and I were a bit ahead of the curve on some of the things that we were talking about when we started this journey. And, we wound up where we are today, and I think things are kind of catching up to where we are. And, it's been a hell of a ride. And I got to tell you that. And I think this is just the beginning of that ride.
I do think we caught the curve at the right time because you said to me
Yes.
once, Peter, that we've been around a lot. You could probably tell by looking at my lack of hair that I've been around for a while, and I've seen a lot of things come and go. I've seen a lot of technical trends and fads.
Yeah,
We've lived through everything from Agile's going to solve the world to the API revolution to blockchain to Bitcoin and NFTs and you name it, right?
I know. Oh my.
And I think what that's done for us is this we were able to look at this through the lens of all those previous technical waves that we were riding, and we were able to see that this time it's different. And I truly do
Yes.
believe there is something very fundamentally different about our current moment in AI, and it's going to have a big impact on all of us, which is why we're doing what we're doing.
No, 100%. I absolutely agree with you. And I think you're right. And I think, like you said, you and I have been around the block. We've seen things. Look, I started out, I was programming an assembly language on a 6502 processor. And for those that you don't know what that is, go Google it. You'll find that it was around 40 something years ago. And we've seen, we've seen the cell phone, we've seen the web, we've seen internet, we've done a lot of interesting, fascinating things over our decades of experience. And I think we bring a different flavor to, the AI and data space that many cannot. Look, we've worked closely with businesses our entire career. And I think you and I bring a uniquely different perspective to the discussions that I see all the time out there. And I think, when we founded the company, that was the goal. We wanted to be different. We didn't want to be like everybody else. We wanted to be deeper and much more, I think, practical about how you implement some of this technology, if you can even call it technology.
Well, and I think it's safe to say that there probably aren't too many other AI experts walking around who remember dropping a stack of punch cards on the floor of the computer lab at midnight and having
No,
to pick them up and try to figure out how to put them back in the right order before you could load them in the machine. Those were the fun days.
those
So,
are the fun
well,
days. I know it sounds crazy, but hey, look, hey, my first computer had a 300 baud modem. Again, go look that one up. That's how long ago it was.
well, let's talk about what all in on data means because we spent a lot of time figuring out what to call this company, and we landed on the name
Yes.
all in on data. Do you wanna describe what that means to us?
We look at, yeah, I mean, you can look at it a couple of different ways, but if you look at data when relative to analytics and AI, without data, there is none of that. It doesn't exist. You don't have AI, you don't have analytics without data. So data to us is foundational to everything that is going on in the world today. And I think that message gets lost with a lot of companies and a lot of people, which is why David and I are always like, it's about the data. It's about the data. It's about the data.
Yep. And in fact, it's not just literally meaning that we're all in on data, although we are. It also is a reminder to
Yep.
ourselves and to everyone else that all in also spells AI, and AI on data is literally the way it's built, right? Data is the foundation for all
Right.
AI. And I think what
Yep.
we have seen in the last year, year and a half is that people pay a lot of attention to the latest shiny AI model, and they don't pay enough attention sometimes to the data that powers it, the data on which it was trained, or the data that they're going to use for inferencing when they deploy a model. So,
No, I think that's 100% correct. And I think that gets lost. And again, it's kind of the shiny new object out there, don't you think?
yeah,
A lot of
it
people?
is. It is. And I think our goal in all of this, and we'll talk in a minute about why we're doing this podcast, but I think one of our goal has always been to help demystify this world of AI, to take people
Right.
along that journey from seeing it as a shiny new object that's curious and maybe a really neat parlor trick to actually grasping its potential to change the way their business operates. Um, that's really
Yes,
the mission.
absolutely. And that's been our mission since day one. Since the very first conversations that we've had with potential clients or clients was, let's have a real honest discussion. We're not trying to push something on or push a solution on because it's a cool new toy. Though we're engineers, we like cool new toys. I love cool new toys. But the reality is, we want to educate everybody that this is not just a simple new shiny toy. It's not just something that you could, I don't know, put on a periphery, play with it a little bit, kind of throw it over the fence and say, hey, go, tell your CIO, go do stuff. We wanted to get to the meat of the problem. We wanted people to truly appreciate and understand the nuance and the depth of the tech and how it's going to change your business and really
Yeah.
appreciate the level of complexity that's necessary to do this the right way.
Yeah. Oh, so I'm curious. I'm going to go off. Well, I'd say off script, except we don't actually have a script,
We don't
as you
have a
can probably
script.
tell. Um, but let me ask you, what? Having said all that, what's been the most surprising thing for you on this journey so far? Like, I'm just curious.
I don't know if it's as surprising as much as I'm always yeah, maybe a little taken aback, I guess, actually. But maybe not. I don't know. I mean, look, you and I, it's funny because we've been around so many different things. Nothing really, I think, shocks me anymore. I think we both knew that nothing really like, I'm like, oh, okay, fine, something else. Somebody has a different perspective. But, look, I think like some new technologies, when the internet came around, there is this absolute explosion of people who think they know how to use it. And there's everybody out there talking about it. My I think is one, how, couple of surprises. One, how fast things are changing. I've never
Yeah,
seen technology evolve quite as fast. We've seen, and I always say AI is like the greatest marketing term that's ever been invented. The problem is 99% of the people out there have absolutely no idea what it means. And you have a lot of companies throwing a lot of money at something without having any appreciation or what it takes to be successful at it, thinking that the more money they throw at it, the likelihood of having something that works is going to be higher. And I have yet to see that materialize, quite honest.
yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it totally makes
Yeah, so,
sense to me.
you know,
So,
and I think even
okay.
some of the partners that you and I've worked with um, have been, they don't even appreciate how to sell this technology, like what it really truly takes to make it successful.
Yeah, it's we've gotten to the point where it's almost de rigueur that you have to have AI in your product. You have to have AI in your office, in your company. But I'm not sure that very many people have gone much deeper than that. It sort of has been a binary. Did you turn on AI? Yes or no? Not really a
Yes.
strategy.
Yeah, no, I
So,
actually 100% agree with you. But this goes back to why you and I think you and I kind of appreciated it from the very beginning. We got it. We got it, I think, very quickly. And, maybe it's because of our backgrounds and data and all this other stuff, but I think we looked at it and basically said there's something really profound here that's going to have a big impact, and part of why we do what we do when we get out there and we talk about it as much as we do, and we try not to speak about, well, there's a new model out here today, therefore that's great and wonderful. That's really not, we care about that, but that's not the real gist of why we do this. It's, I think, educating people on the true power of this, of artificial intelligence and what it will do to an organization. And it's a message I think that needs to be heard because this isn't going away.
yep. Well, that's us in a nutshell, right? That's Peter, that's David, and that's All In on Data.
Yep.
That's what us
Yeah.
and now all of the people who are part of All In on Data. That's what we're committed to doing.
Yes. Yes. And we hope you come along for this journey, which we hope is long. We thoroughly enjoy getting out there and speaking about this to everybody. And I don't think there's a day that goes by when I can't say, oh my God, I got to talk about this again. It's wow, I get to educate somebody else. And I think that is, to both of us, I think again, gets me out of bed in the morning. I find it fascinating. I find it, enjoyable to how can I apply the tech to new problems that I've had in the past. And it's never a dull day.
So
So
I hope many of you are here because you joined us on LinkedIn Live, but I also hope that there's a lot of you who are joining us for the first time as we've moved to the podcast platform. We maybe should talk a little bit, Peter, about what we actually want to do. Why are we here? Like, what's the goal of having a podcast? Because it is not just for fun; it's a lot of work. So, what's
it
our
is.
takeaway here?
I think for both of us, and I think I speak for both of us, it's education. It's teaching people. It's sharing our knowledge. And I think it's sharing the type of knowledge that we think you can't easily find other places. And I think that was really the goal at the end of the day. I mean, we have between the two of us 75 years of experience, if not more. And I think
Thanks.
I didn't say that really. This
Okay,
is a
good.
this is a this is a what do you call it? This is a filter. It's a very good filter, mind you.
Okay.
It's, but at the end of the day, we really. What do you think, Danny? To me, that's one of the
Yeah.
main reasons why we do this.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's about teaching, explaining. I always use the phrase demystifying AI because you were saying a few minutes ago that things are changing so fast. And, the way I look at it is there are a lot of people out there who have day jobs, running companies, running organizations or teams or
Right,
departments, all sorts of different capacities that they have. Our day job is to spend our time, and we do, studying, using, testing, coding, and figuring out this stuff, and then trying to demystify it and bring it back to
right.
people in a way that we can help explain and help. help them understand what's really going on and what they need to know.
Right. And I think you and I, we tend to target, we target everybody, obviously, but I think executives, I think more so, just to get them to appreciate the complexity of the tech and what it can do for the business. Like, we're not here to talk, we talk tech, obviously, we always do. But I don't necessarily think that was ever truly our goal. It was really to communicate to people that there's a profound shift coming, and you really kind of need to think about this. And it's not a shiny tool that you're just going to deploy. This is something that really requires an enormous amount of planning and thought to get the most out of it. And we wanted to get that message across. And that was,
So
you know,
that sounds very noble, right? That sounds like a noble purpose, and I'm hoping you agree with me because I would like to be able to go home and tell my teenage daughter that no, I don't just want to be an influencer, which I think she's accused me of a couple times.
we are not influencers, and we're not going to pitch products here, but we are definitely not influencers. And I think honestly, we don't fit the demographic, and we don't look the demographic, and a whole bunch of other things. I can't see you and I being influencers.
No, I think, look, we are at the heart of it, we're practitioners who are using this and other channels to help share what we've learned, what we think, and, at the end of the day, really to um, promote an interesting discussion amongst ourselves, with our audience, and with our guests about what's happening with AI and what do we need to know about it. So,
Right, and and it's not just the tech. I mean, very often we kind of veer off into philosophical discussions about this, but you and I have both been involved in large digital transformation type projects on enterprise level. So we get what it takes to really make a change, and we understand that. I think a lot more deeply than I'll say this as nice as I can. Some of the other, we'll call them influences out there. We have a different perspective on this, a much deeper, much more nuanced, I think, view than, oh wow, there's a new toy. Let's go play with it. It's AI today. Let's go make some pretty images. It's a lot more than that.
no, I hope it is. That's always been our goal. And, as you mentioned at the top of the show, we started doing this as a series of LinkedIn live broadcasts every Thursday at 11 o'clock Eastern time. And we did quite a few. I forgot how many we've done, but we have quite a few of those in the
Yeah.
can, as they say. Um,
Yep.
but as of today, we're moving to a more traditional podcast format. We're going to do them, obviously, we're going to release them on or LinkedIn as well, but they'll also be on all the podcast platforms. Um, let's talk about why we made that change, and it wasn't just because we couldn't handle the pressure of always recording live, um, contrary to popular opinion. Now, what really was behind that change?
Behind the change was actually we want to target more people. I mean, I'm sorry, but the target audience that we're usually going for is not sitting on LinkedIn Live at 11 o'clock in the afternoon when they're work, or sitting in the shower or doing something in their house. We wanted to hit a whole new audience that we otherwise could not have hit. We wanted to increase the reach that we, didn't have on LinkedIn Live. And, LinkedIn Live, I think, was great for us. It really, one, it created a lot of content that we have, but it also allowed us to polish our message a little bit, get better at this and really kind of grow into it. And this was the natural segue for both of us to really get the message out there. You can watch it on your own time, whenever you want, on any channel that you want. And that was really important to us.
So the
So
training wheels are off, is what you're saying.
we've gone from the training wheels to the, I don't know, to the motorcycle, the high speed motorcycle. We're going on races. There's no doubt here. But yeah, look, you know what? I will say this, of all the people that we've spoken to and all the feedback that we've gotten, the message seems to be resonating and we wanted to get that out.
Yeah, no, we do, and I think the other side benefit to us, other than not having to be always in front of an internet connection and a camera at 11 o'clock on Thursdays, is we've been talking to a lot of people who we
Mm.
want to bring on as guests, and while
Yes, yes.
we have had a couple of guests, it's always very hard because the time zone or the time slot doesn't change, and so I think now by doing it this way, we can have a lot more flexibility with getting guests on. We have a list of people that we are talking to and we really want to bring on and really want to have them join the conversation. But for those of you who are listening, we would also love to hear, who would you like to hear from? Are there people that you want us to go out
Yeah,
and approach, strong arm, bribe, or kidnap to be on the
all
podcast?
the above.
Or all the
No, I
above?
think that
Yeah.
if all the above. And honestly, I'm glad you said that because that's exactly the case. I mean, we want to make this interesting, fascinating, and relevant for you. Moreover, it's so your feedback is Most definitely welcomed, encouraged. Please, pros, cons, negatives, whatever. You want me to wear a Aloha shirt? I will happily put one on. Just let me know.
You know, that's copyright infringement. You can't do that, man. Um, the last thing I'll mention on the podcast logistics front, we'll call it, is we are putting up all of our back episodes from LinkedIn Live over the next
Yes,
week or so. They'll start to titrate onto the podcasting platforms. I think,
yes,
obviously, I'm biased, but I think they're a good listen because we generally didn't spend a lot of time talking about what's new this week. There are any number, infinite numbers of sources about what's new this week. And there wasn't a lot of value in that for us. I think the value, as you intimated earlier, has been going deeper and talking about what does it mean and what's the impact of this and how do you use it. And
right,
I think the vast
right.
majority of what we've talked about for the last several months, every Thursday, is still relevant, or at least I hope it is. So I would encourage people to go
No,
back and look at the back catalog and check out our greatest hits album.
yeah, and they're pretty. I think they're pretty great, actually. Honestly, looking at the topics that Dave and I, we've always had this philosophy that there's so much to analytics and artificial intelligence that is foundational in nature and doesn't really change that much over time. And that's the stuff that we try to hit on. There's things about human nature and transformation and operational readiness and all this other stuff that rarely gets spoken about, but at the end of the day is actually in many ways the hardest stuff. Especially when you're trying to, take a new technology as powerful as artificial intelligence and some of these models, and bring it into an organization. And if you overlook the people aspect of it, and these are the
Yeah.
things that we wanted to get across because it simply wasn't out there. And
Yep.
I remember, and we can segue to something else. I remember looking for Harvard Business Review a couple of months back and just looking for generative AI articles, and I think it came up with like 4 or 5. There really weren't a lot on there. Now I think there's a lot more, but at the
Right.
time there really weren't many. I was like, wow, this is a problem. We're not. People aren't looking at this the way we think it should be looked at.
Right. No, and that's one of our missions amongst many is to change them. I think the change the way and help shape the way that people look at AI, I should say. I think the other mission, realistically, is to accumulate enough hours of bloopers that you can release a bloopers tape for all the nonsensical things that come out of my mouth when I haven't had enough coffee in the morning or when I've had too
So
much coffee in the afternoon or right.
never
Like,
mind bloopers. I told you we want to book at Davidisms. David has a knack of saying things that I don't know where he gets them from. They're out of the blue. I just look at him. I got to turn my head and go, "Where the hell did you get that from?" And I sit there utterly baffled, and it usually requires some kind of translation because I don't always understand. But
and,
I think we're going to
and,
come out at the end of all this with David's list of sayings, and I'll call them Davidisms,
sure.
which I think
And
are
sometimes they even make sense.
they always make sense. Not initially, but once they're explained, they make sense. The English major comes out, and you're great at
Uh, all right. We've milked
that.
that cow long enough. Shall we want to move on to our current
Yes, we
topics?
have. Yes, we have. All right.
Well, I know there were a couple of things we did want to talk about of impact. Maybe
Yes.
they are a little bit current events.
Yep.
And the first one is I learned a new meaning for the word glazing in the last few weeks. So I knew that I knew you could glaze glass, like that's
That's
putting
all
a
I
pane
knew.
of glass in a window. I've
That's what I
certainly
thought.
had my share of glazed donuts. Um,
Yes.
Krispy Kreme for the win.
Oh,
Uh,
they're the best.
yeah, but I never thought I would hear the term glazing uttered in relation to artificial intelligence. Now,
I sure as
it's
hell
hard.
didn't never knew that. I was, yeah.
Nope. And it's hardly news. It's been going on now for almost a month, right? But I
Yeah.
think what's been interesting is it's still happening, and people don't seem to understand why. And if you believe what some of the model development companies are saying, they aren't fully understanding why it's happening either. So um, let's back up and talk about what is glazing besides the best way to serve a donut.
Well, I was at the bet. Well, and I was clearly, when I heard the term, I was totally glazed over because I had no idea what they were talking about. I had not heard the term at all. Did require a little bit of research. And what's the other term that goes sycophantic or sycophant? I
Yeah,
think was the other
yeah.
term that came
I
along
think
with
our
that.
generation we would call it a sycophantic models. I think a Gen Z
Yes.
version is glazing.
So for those of you that know what it is, it's the model being overly, not optimistic, overly complimentary, I think is one way of looking at
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
telling you how wonderful you are for asking such a brilliant question. And it was kind of way over the top.
Yeah. And it also often comes out as not just overly complimentary, which it is, but also overly familiar in a way that can sometimes be friendly and reassuring, and frankly, sometimes looks and feels a little bit creepy. Um,
Yes, yes, and
yeah.
that was one of the gripes that came out of it. Borderline creepy, if not over the top, but it made people not trust the models anymore, and that was a big issue. And
So it's kind of
so
funny you say that, but because I'm not sure I agree that it made them not trust, I've seen just as many people who, where it had the opposite reaction, it made them think,
really,
oh my God, this model gets me. This model finally appreciates me and it gets me. And I love this
oh
thing. I'm
my,
going to talk to it more. Oh,
we're
totally,
going off
100%.
into a whole tangent with these things. I have no idea where we're going to wind up.
I
Talk
mean,
about Hal coming out.
it is actually sort of amusing and disturbing at the same time. And the
Yes.
disturbing part to me is yes, I definitely have talked to people who finally feel heard and understood by these models, and they have
Oh my,
almost an emotional reaction to it. They're like, it
I know.
feels good to have that acknowledgement back from a model. Now, that acknowledgement is over the top, and the model doesn't really appreciate you. The model is, for whatever reason, the model is saying these things. Um,
Mm,
but I was talking to someone the other day, and they were saying amongst other things, it really creates we'll say, a risk that people who
yeah,
are lonely or vulnerable might actually be more open to being taken advantage of and swindled with the assistance of these models, because
yeah.
imagine that there's a model that starts telling you exactly what you want to hear, and imagine that model, once you feel an emotional connection to that model, then the model suggests that maybe you should like write a check to the model's favorite charity, or something. I don't know exactly how that would work. Clearly I haven't spent enough time thinking about how I could be a con artist.
Others have.
Others have, and I am sure people are doing it. And so I
Yep.
I I started out thinking that this glazing and sycophancy was just amusing and a little bit annoying, and now I actually think it's kind of dangerous. I really do.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. I don't like it. I, oddly enough, for all the models I've used and the amount of time I spend on them, never noticed it. And I don't know why I never noticed it. Maybe I just wasn't asking questions the right way.
It doesn't do
Or
it
the
to me
way,
either.
yeah,
The
I don't know.
models don't like me. What am I doing
That's got
wrong?
to
The
be it.
models don't like me.
Well, I think you need therapy now. We probably
They
both need
never they
therapy.
never praise me.
That
Yeah.
nice to me. I get nothing back from them. I don't get,
No,
hey, Peter,
me
you're having
neither.
a great day. You look good today, Peter. No, I don't get any of that. I get
No,
nothing.
no. I mean,
I
but
get,
we've been, for the better part of 2 years, you and I've been telling people that there is a razor edge you have to walk between being appropriately skeptical of a model, and
yes,
when we explain to people the inner workings of large language models and how they actually function, and they begin to get the idea that there isn't really intelligence in the normal sense there, that helps them maintain that skepticism and objectivity. And that razor edge is, be skeptical, but we also 100% believe that there are real applications where you can build systems and applications with these models. You just have to know what
right.
the risks are. Now, I, that's a long-winded way of saying I feel like that skepticism gets eroded in people when they get so much praise. I was talking to someone the other day who
Yes.
asked a model to simply help rewrite a letter just to make it flow better. And the model rewrote the letter as it always has, but then it came back and said, this is an amazing letter. It's forceful but polite, it's professional, it's compelling, and you'll
Oh
absolutely
my
get
God.
results with this letter. And
Oh my, yeah,
I,
wow.
right, and I can imagine a world in which you hear that, and then when you hear that from the model, that then influences how skeptically you review the edits the model made. You might be like,
Yeah.
it's great. I don't need to proofread it very carefully because the model said it's amazing. Um, so it worries me.
it's a fine line you have to cross, and they clearly crossed it. And I think they actually do understand now what caused it, and they were able to figure it out and dial it back. But that it's a fine line. I mean, look, there is some benefit to having some emotional capability, or what I say, the appearance of emotional intelligence in the model and coming back with something. But over the top, like it did, I think has a very negative impact on a number of different levels, and it's not good, obviously not good. But like I said, I think there is some benefit to having some emotional to it, but it depends. I don't know. Yeah, I'm up for argue either way on this one.
Well, and I can see a lot of ways in which things could go wrong if you had some not very good ideas and the model encouraged you and the model said those are
Right,
great ideas, right? Like it's
right.
easy to think of some bad outcomes that could happen there. So
Oh yeah,
I'm overall fairly concerned about it. I guess maybe the silver lining is there was also a study, and I think we talked about this on the previous podcast episode, but there was a study done where some scientists actually fine-tuned a model to be basically the equivalent of a psychotherapist. And the
yes,
model engaged in talk therapy and was found to be nearly as effective, or in some cases more effective, than human therapists, which
right, right.
struck me at first as, huh, that's interesting. And then I read further and saw, and I wasn't aware of this, there is a serious shortage in trained, qualified
Yes,
psychotherapists. So
yes.
this is a very beneficial use of the model, and maybe a sycophantic glazing model could be good as a therapist, but I'm still not
Maybe
convinced. I don't know.
I'm not convinced of that one. I don't know. It's like having a friend who will tell you every day, God, you're wonderful, you're great, you're this. And after a while, you're like, yeah, I don't believe a word you say anymore. And I just feel like that's what happens. And like you said earlier on, you stop trusting the model if all it does is tell you how wonderful you are, because you know you're not wonderful all the time, maybe sometimes. So not all the time. Well, maybe you are. I'm not. I don't know.
Nah, here's the bottom line for me. I want my donuts glazed, but not my AI models.
Yes,
That's the way
100%
to
agree
do it,
with
right?
that. I'd rather have those, fresh off the assembly line, donuts that are glazed, dripping with, the glaze, the sugar. Yeah, no, that sounds really
You
good about
excuse me
right
a
now.
minute. I'm gonna run to the grocery store and get some
Yeah,
donuts. I'll be
no,
back.
that's not
Yeah.
fair. No, I don't. I
No.
don't. No, no, no.
No. All right. Well, that was our glazing conversation. Pretty interesting stuff. I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
look, if you'd asked me a year ago if, first of all, if I'd ever say the word glazing out loud, I never had occasion to use that word. And second,
nope.
if we'd be talking about models about AI being too friendly. I remember that the narrative a year ago was
Yeah,
the robots are coming for us. They're going to kill us all and take over the world. And
yep.
now people are like, I love my robot. I love my AI. Get a grip, people. Right?
I know. Hey, we're in a crazy world. It's about to get crazier. Anyway, one more thing I
Hard to
want to
imagine.
segue to.
Yeah,
Now,
go for it.
no, I know. One more thing I think you had mentioned it briefly, that when we teach people, so for those that don't know, and I'm sure most of you do not know, David and I actually teach a graduate class at RPI, Rensselaer Polytech Institute, for executives on learning and understanding generative AI. And I think for you and me both, it's been a journey understanding how to communicate some of these rather complex topics, to
Yeah.
those that are not as in the weeds as you and I are, either mathematically or technically, and get that across in the message. So, like you were saying, part of what we do is explain how these models work and the internals of them. It gives you a deeper appreciation. And that was kind of one of the goals that we wanted to achieve in teaching the class.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a great experience. We just wrapped it up a week ago, right?
Yeah.
The first
Yep.
the first cohort, and there
Yep.
will be more cohorts of that. We're going to teach it again, but
Yes.
yeah, it was a great experience. I mean, I have to admit that I sort of forgot what it would be like to teach the course because we spent months and months and months preparing the materials and
Yes.
creating all the class materials and the lectures and the slides,
Yeah.
and then updating them because everything changes so frequently, and it was just an intense project to get all this ready to go, and
It
I got
was.
so focused on that I forgot that we actually then got to talk to human beings and
And teach them
actually do
and
that.
kind of walk them through the journey of what does it take to actually identify a use case in an organization that's executable. And the goal wasn't to be, I think it was meant to be different than a lot of the other content out there and not speak about, well, there's this framework or there's that framework, or you could program in this language or that, or this model's better than this model. And this is why. That was never the intent, because there are some things, there are a lot of things that are really common amongst all the models. And we wanted to just give you a deeper appreciation of the theory of how these things actually function. And it's this way when you walk into your organization, you can have an intelligent discussion about, guys, I want to do an AI project. This is a use case
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, and it's you've qualified already. You understand that the tech can in fact work, and then
Yeah.
increase your level of success.
So that's a really good point. The reason we actually called it generative AI for leaders is exactly what you said. We wanted people to be able to understand at a high level how generative AI models work, to recognize opportunities for them, to assess the reality and the challenges associated with it. And I think it comes from a fundamental belief that we share, which is when it comes to generative AI, the only way to lead is to have some knowledge. You can't
Right.
you can't be the pointy-haired boss from the Dilbert cartoon. He says, "Over there, everyone run that direction," right?
Yeah.
You've got to know what you're talking about. And
Right.
so we didn't set out to make everyone AI experts. We set out to give them a deep glimpse into what happens under the covers, how the models work, and some of the practical considerations around implementing AI for their companies.
Right, 100%. And to us, an educated consumer is really incredibly valuable. It makes the process go better. It makes everybody happier. And that was really one of the major goals is being able to have, customer consumers or other people who are, educated and understand and appreciate the limitations and the pros and the cons and where it can and cannot be applied. And
So
I think we
we
achieved that goal.
Yeah, no, I think we did. I was going to say, what did we cover? We covered the inner workings of large language models. We went into a little
Yeah.
bit of the theory behind it. We talked about the transformer architecture and things like that at a modest level of detail.
Yep.
Uh, we didn't go too deep, I hope. But we talked about the inner workings of the models. We talked about how to identify use cases and some different types of architectural patterns for developing real solutions with these models. And I think that's an important thing to point out. When you and I talk about AI, we're not talking about personal productivity use cases. We're not talking about
No,
giving everyone access to ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini, and they use it to rewrite their emails or take meeting minutes, right? That's
no,
that's not where
that's
the
way
value
out.
is. Yeah.
No, no, those are the easy edge cases that, edge cases, but those are the things that don't concern us. Applying it deep within the organization and doing true digital transformation.
So we helped people talk about like how would you recognize those opportunities? What would the different architectural patterns be that you might use? We talked about data and the role of data and the role of your proprietary data in creating solutions. What else did we talk about? I think we talked about responsible AI and
Monzo
risk.
AI, yes. Yep. Spent quite a bit of time on that also.
Yep. We talked about organizational readiness and the cultural change that has to go along with deploying AI. Um,
Right. And we made everybody come up with a series of use cases and walk us through their thinking behind these use cases. And, we go back and forth, much like you would in an MBA type of a program where you're present a case, your business case, and we sit there and we critique it and we say, well, why do you think about this? Why did you do this? Is this the right approach? Is this the right answer? And it gives the students an opportunity to defend their thinking behind this and adjust accordingly, and that's how you get better.
Yeah. No, and in fact, that I think if I had to pick out my favorite part about the course that we did, I think first of all we were very lucky that we had an engaged and thoughtful and intelligent group of participants. We had some great conversations, but I think what I loved about it was we didn't teach the lessons. We had pre-recorded lessons and with
Right.
PowerPoints, and we had workshops that people did and homework that they were assigned homework of a sort, and so we didn't
Yep.
teach that stuff. What we did that was probably the most gratifying to me is we just came together and we talked about it. We talked about what we'd covered in lessons. They had questions, they had ideas, they had use cases. In many cases they had done their own follow-up experimentation, and we had discussions about what they learned how did it
Hmm.
behave, and did it behave the way they expected or differently? And it was
Right.
all, I found that to be, we learned as much, I think, from
Oh,
the
100%.
participants as, yeah, it was
Yeah,
great.
100%. It's like when you try to explain something to somebody, if you could explain it in terms that are simple, you have a deeper appreciation and understanding of the material than if you're just reading it from a book. And I don't know, I find teaching definitely gives me a much more um, a greater depth of knowledge. You really internalize the information when you're trying to communicate it to somebody who knows nothing about something that you intuitively know.
Yeah. So, look, I mean, I guess since it is our podcast, we're allowed to plug things, right? And I'm going to plug,
Yep.
take a look at the RPI at Work program. That's the continuing education graduate level programs. And they have some interesting ones. They have a quantum computing course. And of course, they have our generative AI for business leaders course. So if you're interested, take a
Yeah.
look at that. Um,
And just one thought, these are you do get continuing education credits, so your firms
oh,
generally
yeah.
will cover the cost of these.
Yep. So I'm
So
glad we
makes it
did it, and
easier.
I'm looking forward to the next course.
Yeah, me too. No, I'm definitely it was a good time. Uh, you know, again, learning experience. And these are the yeah, I don't know where I'm going with any of this now.
I always like the way the Click and Clack, the Tappert brothers, wrapped up their show. They'd always say, like, "Well, it's happened again. You've wasted another perfectly good hour listening to us talk about AI." So,
I
so
think I think we should adopt that. I like
yeah,
that.
and so it's happened again. You've wasted another perfectly good hour listening to Peter and David talk about AI, but at least you
Exactly.
got your dishes done, your lawn mowed, or
Whatever
whatever it
you were
is you
doing
had to
while
do.
you were listening to us ramble on, I'm happy for you.
Yep, exactly.
So, well, David, that's the wrapping up of our premiere or first, true podcast getting blasted out to the world of Call Me Data. And this will be dropped on the 22nd, I believe.
Yeah, I think it'll be dropped on May 22nd. So right around the corner. And yeah, it's exciting. And I was going to make a joke about like everyone should download it on their iPods and MP3 players because that was where I first started listening to podcasts.
So I think we're going to crawl up the leaderboard. Next thing you know, we're going to be competing with Joe Rogan. So that's what I'm at.
Well, at least we're not going to compete with him for guests. I'm pretty sure there's
No,
little to no overlap amongst our guest lists, right?
yeah,
So,
maybe one. That's about it. But yes, I agree with
yeah.
that.
All right.
Anyway, well, again, thank you everybody for joining us. And if there are any questions, input, good, bad, or ugly, please send it our way. We would love to hear it. And
Especially if
David,
you, yeah, especially if you have requests for topics you'd like us to address, as long as they're AI related in some way, shape, or form, we'll entertain those requests, and
yes.
hopefully we'll see you, or be seen by you in a week.
And one last thing, if you like, Aloha shirts and you want to send one to David, we will happily give you the address.
That's a scary thought.
Anyway, thank you
It may
everybody.
shock you. It may shock you to learn that I have standards for my shirts.
Like the
They
dinosaur one I picked out
they
for you?
aren't very evident standards. They're very low standards, but they are standards.
But nonetheless, they're standards.
Exactly. All right.
Thank you, everybody. You have a great day.
Cheers.